Whispering Shadows of the Cabin, Part 2. I backed up against the counter, my pulse pounding in my ears. What the hell is going on? Claire shook her head, her face pale and her hand still trembling. I don't know. I don't want to hear it anymore. She turned and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stood there, staring at the ceiling where the faint sound of static hummed steadily through the boards. A chill ran down my spine as the sound shifted, and for a moment, I thought I could hear the creak of footsteps from above. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to keep me rooted in place, staring up at the locked attic door as Claire's garbled voice echoed through the attic again. I don't know why I ever married you. Time blurred into itself. The storm outside, returning to bury the cabin in deeper drifts of snow, and the sound upstairs filling our world with a ceaseless, mocking static. At times, it would go quiet, just long enough for Claire and me to let our guards down, consider talking about something, anything, beyond our own misery. But right when I thought we might have a chance at conversation, the radio would crackle back to life, louder and more intrusive than before. It was a few days in when I realized that I wasn't just replaying our worst arguments anymore. It was anything we'd spoken to or about each other. I heard my own voice from months ago telling a friend how Claire doesn't see me, how she makes everything a battle. A while later, it shifted to Claire's voice, raw and sobbing, confiding in her sister that she didn't know how much longer she could endure me. I recognized every word, every breath, because I remembered her phone call that night. She'd locked herself in the bathroom, and I'd pressed my ear against the door. I had never regretting being nosy as much as that night. Here it was, echoing through the attic, laid bare. Every time the voice became clearer, I'd see Claire's face tighten, a tortured mix of guilt and fury. We couldn't escape each other's taunts or the house's apparent need to throw them at us like daggers. We hardly said a word to each other, circling each other in the small cabin, surviving on canned soup and stale crackers. I tried calling the owner again and again, leaving voicemails that grew more frantic with each attempt. My calls went unreturned, my hope dwindling with each missed connection. Claire's phone signal was the next to go. She tried to scroll through social media, text her friends, anything to distract herself, but no matter where she stood or where she tried, her phone could barely muster one bar. She sank onto the couch, eyes full of tears that she refused to let fall in front of me. We have to leave, she whispered on our 5th day in the cabin, her voice trembling as she stared at the swirling white chaos through the window. Jason, I can't stay here anymore. We had discussed leaving the day before, but the weather had barely permitted us to open the front door. It hadn't let up much since then, but the desperation in her voice shook me. Without another word, we bundled up. Thick coats, gloves, scarves. I helped tie her boots. There was something almost tender in the gesture, and for a moment I wondered if we could reconcile, to pull ourselves out of this nightmare by sheer force of will. But stepping outside was like entering a frozen void. The wind whipped icy needles of snow at our faces, and the driveway was half buried in drifts. I dug at the car door, yanking the icy handle open, only to find the interior of the car felt as cold and lifeless as the air around us. The engine refused to turn over, coughing twice before going silent. I glanced at Claire. Her eyes darted to the steep, unpaved road that snaked down the mountain. Even if the car started, we'd be risking our lives trying to maneuver those icy curves. We looked at each other, and I knew she felt as defeated as I did. We trudged back to the cabin, fighting each step through the wind. My fingers had gone numb in spite of my gloves. Claire was shivering violently, a silent terror in her eyes. When I finally managed to force the swollen cabin door open, that now familiar static rushed out to greet us. And then I heard it. Claire's voice upstairs, as usual, speaking words I wished I'd never have to hear. She sounded almost gentle, but her words were damning. I'll leave him soon, she said, her tone calm and intimate. He doesn't have a clue. My heart lurched. Real or not, it felt like a blade twisting in my gut. I glanced at her. Her eyes were wide, tears threatening to spill, the betrayal fresh, even though those words were her own. She looked at me, shook her head, and without speaking, retreated to the bedroom, shutting the door quietly behind her. I stood there, snow melting on my boots, face stinging from the cold, and listened to the static pick up again. The cabin creaked in the wind, sounding almost like a soft, mocking laugh. I could only stare at the dying embers in the fireplace, wondering if anything in our lives would survive this place. As the relentless static from the attic wore on, it seemed to scrape away at the edges of my sanity. The voices unearthed every bitter line, every whispered complaint we thought safely hidden. The cabin felt like a cage, trapping us with an auditory barrage that knew no bounds. Each new revelation, whether a conversation once held secret or a venomous whisper shared in confidence, added weight to an already unbearable tension. "You're just too much, Jason. Always fixing, never listening." Exhausted and desperate, I found myself fixated on the attic. The padlock, an old, rusted relic, mocked me from the ceiling hatch, a barrier to whatever twisted machine perpetuated our torment. I needed to get it open, needed to find out what was happening, but every traditional method had failed. No amount of pleading with the unresponsive owner or searching for a misplaced key had yielded any results. It was just Claire and me growing more estranged with each passing hour. "If you're going to stay this distant forever, Claire, you might as well just leave." Determined, I approached the hatch again, armed with nothing but a sense of determination. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen, positioning it under the attic's pull-down string. The padlock dangled just out of reach, an enigmatic sentinel guarding our tormentor. Did I even want to find out what was up there? The need to stop the voices overpowered any hesitation. I fetched a small toolbox from under the kitchen sink, the one that barely saw use, and rummaged through it for anything that might help. I came up with a couple of old screwdrivers and a tarnished set of Allen keys. Not ideal, but it was all I had. "Why bother, Jason? It's over, isn't it?" I ignored the jibes, focusing on the padlock. I tried each tool systematically, twisting and prodding in a futile attempt to force the mechanism. I eventually gave up on trying to break open the lock, and in my desperation, resorted to trying any and every combination I could think of. My hands, raw from the metal and the cold that seeped into the cabin, worked mechanically. Time lost meaning as I moved from one combination to the next, fueled by a mix of fury and a desperate need for silence. Hours must have passed, the light outside dimming to the early twilight that predicted another long night. The numbers blurred before my eyes, each click a mockery as our voices cried from above. "She's going to leave, you know. Can't you tell?" My brother's voice seemed to boom down at me from above. I winced as I anticipated my next words. "Let her. I don't need this hassle any longer." The frustration and shame built within me like a physical force, a crescendo that demanded release. As I furiously put in every 4-digit combination I could think of, the realization hit me like a brick. I stopped on a new combination, 1231, today's date, but more importantly, our wedding anniversary. A detail that had slipped from my conscious mind but lay buried, a remnant of happier times. With all of the remaining effort my frigid, tired hand could muster, I pulled. The lock clicked open. Relief washed over me, quickly chased by apprehension. What would I find up there? Claire had arisen from the couch and watched, her face a mask of mingled fear and curiosity. Her silence was a gulf between us, but this act, opening the attic, felt like the first truly shared moment in days. I pulled the string and the ladder creaked down, dust dancing in the air disturbed by its descent. We both flinched at the sharp, echoing sound of the radio, clear as day, coming from above. I hesitated, my hand on the ladder. The air felt charged, thick with the anticipation of what was yet to come. The static above us quieted for a moment, as if the attic itself held its breath. "What are you afraid of, Jason? You're a coward. Just run away from it all. Isn't that what you always do?" With a deep breath, I started to climb. The ladder groaned under my weight, each step a creak of old wood. Claire stayed below, her face upturned, watching me ascend into the darkness above. As I approached the top, the chill of the attic wrapped around me, a cold whisper against my skin. I paused, flashlight in hand, ready to sweep away the shadows and uncover the source of our torment. I couldn't bring myself to turn it on, to see what was up here, at least not alone. Instead, I turned it down towards my wife and extended my hand down to help her up. As Claire and I reached the final step of the attic ladder, a chilling silence enveloped us, broken only by the echo of our hesitant footsteps on the floor. It didn't feel like the rest of the cabin. It felt cheap and warm. Linoleum? The beam from my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a sight that made my heart skip a beat. The sight before us wasn't just impossible, it was chilling. We were back home, in our crappy little apartment, or at least a perfect replica of it. Every detail was meticulously reproduced. The arrangement of books on the shelves, the crease on the sofa cushion, even the small, almost imperceptible stain on the carpet near the TV stand. It was our home, duplicated with an unsettling precision, as if someone had taken a snapshot of our lives and recreated it here in the dusty confines of the attic. The air was unnervingly still, thick with a tension that seemed almost palpable. It felt as if the room was holding its breath, waiting for us to shatter the quiet. The musty smell that I'd noticed when first entering the cabin was amplified to the extreme and was permeated with an iron metallic scent that sent my stomach churning. My eyes swept the room, searching for the source of the voices that had tormented us. We didn't own any radio, nor a record player, or any speakers for that matter. Instead, my gaze landed on something far more familiar, my laptop, open on the coffee table, its screen aglow. I ran over to the battered device, tripping over its power cord as I went. The laptop sat neatly on the table as the mouse plugged into it moved of its own accord, clicking the screen every few seconds. My eyes darted to the smudged screen and discovered that it was open to our security app. I'd installed cheap cameras around the apartment soon after we moved in. I told Claire that they were for our own safety, but in truth they were for me, to revisit our arguments, to replay every fight we had, searching for vindication in the details. The computer was clicking from clip to clip, playing a highlight reel of every terrible thing we'd ever said to or about each other. Claire joined me, her steps slow, almost reluctant. Her eyes widened in horror as she watched the screen. I looked back down at the laptop, only to realize that it had changed once again. I immediately recognized the fight. It was the most recent one before we'd left home. Claire, would you listen to me? It's 2 weeks you'll live. It'll be nice and quiet. Who says I even want nice and quiet? I want to get back to real life, Jason. I haven't worked in months, and you planning these surprise trips to try to patch things isn't helping me find a job. So what? I canceled the booking? I already paid the deposit, Claire. We can't get that money back. Or did you forget I'm also working a dead-end job? If you want to book that stupid anniversary trip, go right ahead. You just bulldoze ahead like what you want is the only thing that matters. I watched myself furrow my brow and then put my head in my hand. Claire, I'm trying here. I really am, but I can never get through to you, can I? First it was you passing on the job offer when we needed that money, then it was that thing with your extra. I told you nothing happened, Jason. He just stopped by for coffee is all. Claire, I'm not stupid. You turned off the cameras, but the audio was still recording, you idiot. Don't you dare call me an idiot after all I've done for you. I watched as Claire had stormed towards me and our fight was about to escalate. She pounced at me, but I threw her off of me towards the kitchen. I watched her crack her head on the edge of the table and fall through it. I walked up to the table slowly. I observed her breathing grow shallow as she lay spasming on the floor. I watched her breathing stop as blood slowly pooled around her. I watched myself stand up calmly, then walk into our bedroom. A minute later, I left, quietly wheeling our luggage towards the front door and leaving as my wife lay motionless. Then, as if sensing its audience had seen enough, the laptop's battery icon flashed once, critical, and the screen went black. The sudden death of the device plunged me back into silence and darkness, a quiet so deep it was almost suffocating. The absence of the voices, which had been such a constant and invasive presence, now left a shallow emptiness that was somehow worse than the noise. I sat for a moment, unable to process what I'd just seen. I turned my flashlight up towards Claire, only to see that I was now alone in the room, a dull smell of iron growing ever stronger from the kitchen. I shakily turned my flashlight again. This time towards the kitchen table, shrouded in a cloak of darkness that I hadn't dared breach since I ascended the attic ladder. There, lying crumpled in a heap of splintered wood, lay my wife. Dried blood had pooled around her head, and I winced at noticing that her neck was bent at an unnatural angle. She had begun to bloat and stiffen, and the closer I stepped, the more the iron scent of blood was replaced with a musky, rotted smell. She was almost entirely a corpse, save for her eyes. Fresh and watery, they were locked onto me, silently accusing me. "Claire?" I whispered, praying with every fiber that somehow she was still in there. But she didn't respond, didn't move. She lay frozen, staring intently, eyes following me as I nervously swayed. The air around us grew colder, denser, as if the room itself was closing in, feeding off the rising panic. Then, almost imperceptibly, Claire began to whisper. The words were soft, disjointed murmurs at first, guttural sounds forcing their way out of a broken, bloated throat. As I drew closer, the whisper grew clearer, sharper. They were not the comforting words I yearned for, but a continuation of the cascade of cruel, cutting phrases I had grown accustomed to. "You never really cared, did you, Jason? It was always about you, your needs." Her voice was a ghost, devoid even of its usual disdain, hollow and haunting. I stood, frozen, as her whispers intensified, layering upon each other in a relentless, cold assault. "You're so selfish. You think you're the victim, always playing the martyr." Each word sliced through the already frigid air. The whispers swelled into a torrent of accusations. "You suffocate me, Jason. I can't breathe with you, can't grow. You're a dead weight, dragging me down into your misery." I stumbled backward, hands clamped over my ears, but it was futile. "Stop it, Claire. Please get up. This isn't okay. Please get up." "You should have known I was too good for you. I wasted the best years of my life on a fantasy that you'd change." Her face, so familiar and yet so warped, contorted as her dead lips struggled to keep up with the verbal onslaught. The storm outside seemed to echo her fury, the wind howling against the walls as if in sympathy with her rage. Overwhelmed and unable to bear it, I dropped to my knees, the cold of the floor seeping into my bones. Claire's figure, crumpled across from mine, began to crunch as her frame contorted itself so she could continue to lock eyes with me. Her expression was blank, but her eyes piecing as she continued her litany of grievances. I crawled, sobbing, searching in the dark for the attic door that led me here, but it had long vanished. The floor was solid. As the roar of the frozen world outside began to muffle, snow piling against our artificial windows, her voice was the only sound, a relentless echo in the ghostly replica of our apartment. Her words didn't stop for hours, and by the time she began to quiet, she had managed to stand up and loom over me, cold and pale, whispering accusations and curses at me in the dark. It has been weeks since the door to the outside vanished, leaving me trapped in my own home with the whispering thing that was once my wife. Claire, or the thing that used to be her, grows more gaunt by the day, her features sharpening, her eyes sinking deeper into her skull. She's starting to smell worse, but she keeps whispering. She isn't going to harm me. Not physically. She can't. Her body, crumbling and decaying, only has the energy to torment me with its gaze and with its words. I've tried the front door, but I don't think it's any more than decoration in this mockery of my home. It doesn't lead outside. It doesn't even open. It's just part of the wall. The storm outside is not abated. I can hear it sometimes through the thick snow that covers my windows. If the snow ever subsides, the windows may be my only chance at escape. End of part 2. If you want to hear more stories like this, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. Thanks to everyone who listened to the end.